Welcome to Short Course, episode 110 for September 22nd, 2023. I'm your host, Ben Barry. This is a week now out from the North Carolina section match, the Carolina Clasic 2023, and as is tradition, I figured it'd be good to do a sort of wrap-up episode, talk about what went well, lessons learned, and so on. So, I got a bunch to talk about. I will leave all the topics specific to Chrono and how I ran it and what we saw and all that. I think I certainly have enough for an episode without that, and I will be covering that next week, so that'll be a separate episode. So this one is just generally the sort of match administration and things that we found. So I'm not saying anything here is necessarily original. There are a few things that I know or think is we started, but I don't think we're necessarily unique in any of these, but I just want to cover the things that went well in case people want to take the example and either follow it or adapt it for their own match. It is worth mentioning, so this is the 5th year that Stephanie has been section coordinator, so this is her 5th North Carolina section match that she has co-match directed, and this is the 3rd year that we have had a child. And so once again this year, Grandma came in clutch, and she was actually watching both kids this time. In fact, she was watching our 3-month-old. That was only the second time that she had him overnight, and the first time that she'd had him at her house overnight for 4 nights. And so that was pretty legit. So props to her, and we couldn't have done it without her. So there are always those invisible folks that aren't necessarily seen on the range who make being on the range possible. So much appreciation to her, and obviously we've communicated that directly, but I think it's worth mentioning. So the schedule for the North Carolina section, the way we've been running it, just because this is the way it was when we took it over in 2019, is to do setup day on Thursday, the staff shoot Friday, and then we do a Saturday AM flight, so 9 stages in the morning, so basically 8 to noon, 8 to 1, something like that. An afternoon flight, so 1 to 5, 1 to 6, depending on the scheduling in that particular year. And then a Sunday all day, typically starting around 10 a.m., going until about 3 in the afternoon. And the squads on Saturday are typically a little bit smaller to accommodate the tighter schedule, so something like 8 shooters, where the Sunday squads are slightly larger because you have a little bit more time and you want to get people through. So for me, when I had a chance, I actually have only ever shot this match as a competitor, I think twice, 2016 and 2017, when it wasn't so I worked it 2013 through 2015 when it was at Sir Walter, and then it was at Rowan 16 and 17. It was canceled due to the hurricane in 2018, which is how Steph ended up as section coordinator. And then all those years. So the 2 years that I did get to shoot it as just a regular competitor in 16 and 17, my preference was to shoot it on Sunday because I did like the little bit slower pace. You have a little bit more time between your stages. Just a personal preference thing. I know for some folks, being able to drive in Saturday morning, look at some stages, shoot in the afternoon, and drive home, there's a sort of unique value proposition to that, which I totally understand. But that's the general schedule. Setup day went very well. This is my personal biggest regret from last year was the fact that because we had some folks that couldn't stay for staff day, we ran a squad of shooters Thursday, a squad of staff folks Thursday. And that basically meant that the whole debugging phase of build day was cut short. So the stages were legal. They were fine, but they were, in my opinion, quite unpolished. In particular, not that anybody cares, but if you go back and look, stage 2 was the one that I had designed, and it turned out as much more of a memory stage than was originally designed. And there were certainly some things that we could have done to ameliorate that we were not able to. And then stage 9, which was designed by Jared Heinrich, a good friend of mine and fellow stage designer at Sir Walter. That one ended up getting set up both with something of a goofy start position that basically meant everybody was backing up into the RO, but also there was a more significant than it needed to be 180 issue with the way the ports were set up that, again, could have been addressed if we'd had a little bit more time. So that was sort of my main hesitation, my main regret. And this year, luckily, we had plenty of time to address that. I did not personally get to look at every single stage, but I know that the range master, Gary McConnell, he was looking at a number of them. Some other folks were looking at those, but there were, I think, about 5 of them that I was able to step on, including the stage that I designed, the one that Jared had designed, as well as a few others, and just look at them and sort of say, okay, how can we make this stage? Yes, it might follow the diagram, but on the ground, is this stage imperfect? Is there a way that we can make the shooting more interesting? Typically by just breaking up positions, making it so that there wasn't any one spot where you were shooting 10 rounds or so. And I think there only ended up being really one place in the match where the best stage plan, if you had a high cap gun, was to just shoot 12 rounds from one position. And if I'd gotten a chance to look at that one stage, perhaps we could have done something about it. But overall, that stage, even on that stage where you could shoot 12 from one position, I ended up, there was a fairly viable plan where you just shot 10 and then went to another position, and you could pick up the other target that the high cap guys could take from that first position. So I think the stages, in my personal opinion, I think they were better than last year. Last year's weren't terrible, but I think they were definitely there wasn't any stage that had that sort of memory stage component to it, which again, I really found myself kicking myself about. And just in general, I think personally, I think the stages were quite good. I think they were a good blend of all the different stage designers in the state. The only, if I had one complaint, is that they were all very straightforward. So not a ton of movers, no one-handed shooting, no low ports, no medium ports, nothing really no technical challenges like that. It was all very sort of straight up field course type shooting, which was fine. It could have, if there was one thing that could have been better, it would have been, hey, maybe we add a little, we take this port and we make it a medium or a low port or something like that. But no, that's a pretty minuscule thing. I think the stages were fine. The setup itself, again, went quite good. We had 14 people, give or take. We had 14 people there for setup day. So we were running basically 3 crews of 3 to 4 people. And we had a couple of runners with the carts distributing barrels and wall stands and that sort of thing. So that obviously made light work. Basically, we set up 9 stages, and so each crew only had to set up 30 stages or so. And I think we started around 8 or so, and the building was basically done around noon or 1 p.m. And from then on out, it was just range master debugging, and he was kind of debugging as things were being built. So if he could catch things early, he would. And then otherwise just sort of competitively looking and saying, okay, if we add a barrel stack here, then it turns one position into 1.5, that kind of thing. And so that, again, I couldn't be happier with how that went. For staff day, something that we did last year on Friday that we expanded a little bit more this year was the idea of having embedded ROs in the staff squads. And I think I've heard that other matches have done this, but it really did make things better for the folks shooting on staff day. So basically, depending on the squad you had, the squads that were more heavy on actual staff, where you had more CROs and ROs, they ended up having one person dedicated to just run the timer for every shooter all day. And then for the squads that were more mixed between staff and competitors, because we did open those Friday squads to competitors if for whatever reason they wanted to shoot on Friday. Some guys, it's easier for them to take a Friday away and shoot the match versus getting a Saturday or Sunday away from the family. So our Friday quote unquote staff day was a mix, I would say 40-10, 40-20, something like that, of competitors and staff, but it was really good. I think it worked well. And having those embedded ROs, it's a tough day for them, but then they basically got to pick a schedule, which schedule on the weekend they wanted to shoot. And so they were able to shoot with, whether it was friends that were shooting on the weekend or, a squad of people that they're sponsored with, something like that. And then, so they worked Friday, shot one of the weekend days, and then worked as a staff member on one of the stages the other day of the weekend. So that setup worked really well. I think there's really no issue with that. If anything, the main complaint was there were a few folks that actually wanted to volunteer for that we actually needed working the whole weekend. But if it's to a point where we can actually spare 2 people for each staff squad, so you have a dedicated timer and tablet person for each stage, and so the competitors on Friday, or the staff and competitors on Friday, are only having to paste and reset the targets, and basically otherwise they can have a little bit more time in between shooting because they're not having to hot potato the timer and the tablet around, all the better. So that definitely worked out well. The one thing that, I mean, there's really no other way around it, but for me, I definitely did have a bit of a rough staff day just because we did the way the schedule is. We started staff day from 8:30 to 10:30. You could come to chrono at any time and do a chrono and equipment check because, you know, the rules say everybody gets chronoed, staff included, which, you know, as I've discussed, I think a random chrono selection method, even among the staff, I'm not saying staff are exempt, but I think a random sampling method would be better. But, you know, that ship has sailed for now. The rules say every competitor has to be chronoed. So that's what we did. And it took a good solid 2 hours to get every competitor and staff member on Friday morning chronoed, which was fine. Everything, once we got going, everything was running well. I just forgot. It didn't occur to me. I just assumed somebody was going to come and drop off a tablet so we could start chronoing folks. And I didn't go out of my way to proactively secure one. And so there did end up being about a 15-minute, 20-minute delay for us getting started, which set the whole match back, which that's just on me. I was so focused on getting all the equipment set up and I was just assuming, hey, someone was going to roll up on a golf cart and hand me a tablet, that I didn't go out of my way to make sure that was being provided for. So, you know, one of those things where it was just, I assumed somebody else was doing it. Somebody else probably assumed I was doing it. And so just the little things that never go quite right. But once we got rolling, it seemed like everybody was making good time. We didn't end up being particularly late for the staff dinner, which happened on the range after the shooting concluded on Friday. So everything went pretty well there. And then the rest of the match was a typical, fairly uneventful North Carolina staff reset match. I'll say, you know, I've talked a lot before on the podcast before about staff reset. I in part, it's just a tradition around here. When I worked my first match in 2013, I went to the state match and it was a staff reset match. Of course, we didn't call it that. Nobody had a term for it. It was just the way the North Carolina match was run. And it just seemed obvious to me that that's the way big matches should be, just in terms of getting shooters through more quickly. Everything that we've talked about in the past about reasons that the staff reset is, in my opinion, advantageous. But I'll make 3 points that came out of the various discussions that we had on the range and at the staff dinner and so forth among the staff and with some of the competitors. There's sort of 3 nuances that I don't know that I necessarily had made before that I think are worth talking about. The first one is the idea that in a staff reset match, you have a rung on the ladder for people interested in getting involved in the sport who aren't necessarily ready to run a tablet or a timer. And basically, at a match where you have, say, 2 staff per stage, one guy running the tablet, one guy running the timer, maybe they flip-flop, but the expectation is that basically both of them are certified CROs or ROs. They know how to call all the various safety issues, and they're ideally they've both been through the class and they've had experience. That's a reasonable setup, but there is a gap there. And when I think back, like I was saying, to 2013, when I shot my first North Carolina section match, I volunteered to work it just because the range was half an hour from my house. I figured, why not? It was the first big match I'd shot, and I wasn't certified. I hadn't taken the RO class. I didn't know anything about running the timer, and in fact, I never did. Now, part of that was because I was, amusingly enough, on a stage where Paul Hendricks was the CRO, and he ended up holding the timer and never letting anyone else touch it for reasons that, if you know Paul Hendricks' name, will be somewhat obvious. But I just showed up and I got to shoot on staff day, which I thought was cool because I got to shoot with a bunch of other staff and they helped me understand things and I learned from them. And then I just worked the Saturday and Sunday, and I reset steel and pasted targets and got to talk to the other guys on staff. I got to talk to the competitors on the range. It was a great introduction to me as someone who hadn't taken an RO class yet, but it obviously lit the fire that I wanted to take that next step. And so I do think it's interesting that in a staff reset match, you have that tier for people who haven't yet either been able to get to an RO class, or for whatever reason, their life hasn't lined up with it. And we have one at least once a year here in North Carolina, but I know in some areas of the country, it's more sparse, or you have to drive a further distance. I know there are some candidates for office who've taken a flight to get their RO class to be eligible to serve on the board. So I think it was interesting that even though I had lived it as someone who worked my first match before I was certified, we had some folks this time, in particular, there was a couple, a husband and wife, who have a number of kids, I think 4 kids, and they left them with their grandma, which is awesome. And they were able to come out and kind of work the match as uncertified folks, just helping to paste and reset. They both shot together on staff day, but they got to kind of do this as a husband and wife team, something they could do together. But because we had this role for people who weren't necessarily certified, who couldn't necessarily take a timer, and ideally, may not even be taking the tablet, or having, someone else watch for the offside safety issues, even if someone uncertified was on the tablet, having that spot in the match for them, I think is good in terms of building the flywheel, in the sense that it's somewhere to get your toes wet, to get started in volunteering without having to first spend a weekend, get certified, and do all that. And I know you don't have to be a certified RO to work a major match. I know that's true, but people tend to want to do it. And so having this opportunity to come in at this intermediary tier where you're not even certified, but you can see how a match runs, you can see how a stage runs, you can learn from the CRO on your stage, tips and tricks, you can start to see when they call things in between shooters, in between squads. You can ask, hey, like, what were you doing there? Or why did you make this ruling? What was the issue there? You can get that on the job training, which honestly, the RO class doesn't necessarily give you. I think actually having worked a match, especially under a good CRO who has the heart of a teacher and is willing to pass those things along, I think can actually jumpstart you and definitely primes you for when you take the RO class, you're going to absorb more of it. So I think if you were going to chart out a perfect path, an ideal path, it would be something like working a level 2 match as an uncertified person, and then taking the RO class, just so that when you do take it, you, again, have that context. And so that's something that staff reset matches have more capacity for, where a traditional staff competitor reset match, where you're really only looking for maybe 2 staff per stage, there's less room for that. Someone else, I promise this is not my point. Someone else made the point that people talk about competitor reset matches being, in the quote unquote volunteer spirit of the sport, or that staff reset is, in violation of the quote unquote volunteer spirit. And they actually made the point to me, which I had not thought about this, but it got me chuckling, that when you can only volunteer something if you actually have the option to withhold it, right? So taxes are not volunteering. Charity is volunteering, where if you don't give to your local homeless shelter, no consequences accumulate to you. But if you don't pay your taxes, consequences happen. So that's not volunteering, right? If you go to a match and you do not, and it's a competitor reset match, and you don't paste and reset, it might be slight, it might be social, but there are consequences. And so calling that volunteering it's a little bit emotionally manipulative, in the sense that you can't volunteer something that's not your choice. And I get it. When you sign up for a competitor reset match, you are signing a social contract that says, in addition to paying my match fee, I will help paste and reset. I'm not saying that that's unfair or immoral, but it's not volunteering. It is, you are just agreeing that not only are you going to pay your match fee, you will pay an additional price in labor to participate in the match. But don't call that volunteering. I just thought that was an interesting take that I had not heard before. And then the third thing that some people were commenting on that I definitely appreciate and think is worth pointing out is the fact that a staff reset match like this, in a lot of cases, can end up being a destination. It can be a get together where, if this is the one match a year where you and all your buddies can come together. Well, you actually get more time to hang out and be together on the range because you're not doing the pasting and resetting. You're not having to spend that time going up and down range. And so for the folks who want to make this a destination, not necessarily because they're trying to win their class or trying to win the match, but just it is a place to get together with people that maybe live 2 states away, but everybody can meet in the middle and shoot a match like this on the same schedule, something like that. There's a benefit there in the sense that it's more of a communal atmosphere versus, okay, I got to load my mags. Oh, let me get your phone. I got to video you. Okay, that guy's videoed. Let me go sit down. Let me, drink some water, eat some jerky. Okay, time to move on to the next stage. And you sort of don't, you're shooting the match with your buddies, but you don't actually have that downtime to really make it a bonding experience. And so again, it was something that was pointed out to me that I thought was kind of an interesting take that I hadn't really thought of before, that is another benefit of a staff reset match. A few other items that I wrote down. So once again, the prize table was done in order of registration. So when you checked in, you got to walk the prize table. And once again, it was split into sort of a high value, low value prize table. And the people who were selected for the high value prize table, which I think the cutoff was like $50 or $75. So, things like $100 Blue Bullets gift certificates versus, $50 or $25. The high dollar ones, it was just randomly selected. So when you checked in, I think, 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10, something like that, people ended up walking the high value prize table. Everybody else got to walk the low value one, but you still had this opportunity to walk the prize table and pick something that was useful to you. So you didn't have this issue where as someone who buys factory ammo, maybe you get a gift certificate for a bullet manufacturer, or as someone who has who shoots Glocks, you end up getting a holster for M&Ps or something like that. So the prize table was laid out and you could look over it and decide which prize was of most value to you. And that's something we've been doing for 5 years now, and I think it's been working. It is a lot of work in the sense of all the prizes have to be inventoried and then divvied up into roughly quarters. So a quarter was for the staff, and then a quarter for Saturday AM, quarter for Saturday PM, and then Sunday. Not exactly quarters, because I think Sunday was the biggest schedule, but roughly speaking, divided into 4 roughly equal or proportional parts. So I think that works well in terms of, especially as a match where you don't really control what the sponsors are going to send you, and it's really tough to give it all out to people that are actually going to use it, especially when it's stuff like left-handed holsters for particular guns. Gift certificates are always easier to give out because someone can always just turn that into cash from someone who can use the certificate, and in a lot of cases those are the ones that go first. But the fact that everybody had a roughly equal shot at picking something that was of value to them because the prize table was replenished between schedules, it seems to be the least bad way. It's certainly way better than just randomly assigning every prize to someone. And as I've mentioned before, one of the benefits is you end up looking at all the prizes and then picking one, but you still see, oh wow, this person sponsored, that person sponsored. So you, as a sponsor, you get a lot more eyeballs on your prize versus something like a random draw where the only person who knows that you sponsor the match is the person who randomly draws the item. So I think it's a relatively good system. I'm open to better, but from what we've seen, it's been working, and I think it's something that'll continue. The other thing that we had done last year and continued this year was what Nathan Carter of Shooting Sports Innovations has called the diverging diamond numbering pattern for stages, where basically if you look at the stages all in a row, they're numbered, 1, 9, 2, 8, 3, 7. And then all the way at the end, you basically have 4, 5, and 6 all next to each other. The benefit of this is basically, since every time you're moving stages, you're skipping a bay, but basically halfway through your day, you get to the end of the row and you start doubling back. What it ends up saving us is having that long move all the way back from stage 9 back to 1, which historically we would solve by just having we'd have typically 2 people with golf carts just shuttle people from 9 back to 1. And that works, but this is the second year that we've done this numbering pattern, which is definitely dependent on having big clear number signs for your stages so people can see, okay, I'm going from 1 to 2, which actually means skipping 9, or going from 4 to 5, which actually means skipping 6, that kind of thing. So it's you really need the flags or some kind of clear way to label your stage numbers so that people can know when it's time to skip and where to go next. Other than that, once again, for the staff, so every year there's a stipend to the staff, so everybody gets a certain amount. I think it's something like $150, $100, something like that. And then everybody who's more than 50 miles away from the range gets an additional amount. I think it's 100, 150, something like that. So I think it's the people who drove in from out of town got a check for $275 per person, which obviously if you're able to split a hotel room with another RO, that basically covers your gas and your hotel, so you're not out of pocket to be staying at the match. But then on top of that, every year we try and do some kind of unique and useful staff gift. In the past, it's been a zippered Shooter's Connection gun case that was monogrammed with the logo and the year and the fact that it was staff, and we still see a fair number of those around. This year it was we wanted something, more kind of generally useful in life, but that you might also bring to the range. And so in this case, it was it's a Brewmate drink cooler. So it's basically a double wall thermos, except you can put either 12 ounce or 16 ounce cans in there, but it also has a lid where you can use it as a coffee cup. So, as the old saying goes, it keeps hot things hot and cold things cold. But what was nice is one of the sponsors, one of the local folks, is Make Stuff Better, Brian Wolf and Matt Wolf, who do laser engraving and laser marking of things. And so working with them, it was actually gave us a little bit more latitude to customize things. And they were actually able to, what I think was absolutely awesome, they were able to individually laser engrave the name and years of service marked by a little bullet. So the people who, Steph only had records going back to the 5 years that she's run the match, but the folks that had worked all 5 years that she's worked it got a little mug with the match logo and the year, their name, and then 5 little bullets. And then obviously if you'd done 4, 3, 2, then anyone who'd worked 2 or more years got a mug engraved with their name and the years of service, and then everybody else just got a mug engraved that just said staff. And that was something new this year. That was the idea, is just a little way to signify and recognize the people who have now consistently worked 4 or 5 years in a row, because those are the folks that are the backbone of this match, and we wanted to have a little something extra for them. And then logistically, the only other notes that I have here, one was we did have Bill Duda from Go Fast Don't Suck. He is not traveling and working as many matches as he used to. So last year and maybe the year before, but definitely last year, he had driven down, brought all of his equipment and down to the Wi-Fi network and the tablets and the timers and everything, and basically had given us all the equipment to run all the electronics at the match. His thing now is that he's got a Pelican case that he'll ship you with the timers, the batteries, and the tablets. And the timers are a bunch of AMG Commander timers that sync to the tablets, and they're all numbered, so they're already paired and all that. That setup was awesome. I know people always like having the splits in Practice Score Competitor for looking at things. And in fact, I know there was at least one shooter who, even after he had hit approve, saw on Practice Score Competitor that there was an anomalously high time. It was like 5 or 6 seconds or whatever after his last shot. And he went to the RM and said, hey, I don't think this is right. And the RM was like, yep, that's good. As long as you agree and the RO agrees, we can amend it. I believe that's what I heard. I wasn't there for it, but it's one of those times where having that extra little bit of detail can actually get to a correct score without, say, requiring a reshoot. So thanks to Bill for sending those. And he actually did end up showing up and shooting the match as well, but I think that was sort of a last minute thing. And I think he was able to just take all the equipment home with him, save himself a shipping label. That's my understanding. But it was good to see him. But it was also nice to have that equipment for the earlier days of the match before he got there. So that worked out well. If you're looking to run a major match, definitely reach out to Bill, see if you can borrow that setup, because it's all packaged in a neat Pelican case, just comes right to you. And especially if you don't have the commander timers or a Bluetooth timer that counts the shots, I think that's a real value add if you can have it for the competitors that are interested in that kind of thing. And then the last thing I have here is just that we did actually end up getting a fair bit of rain on Sunday, which mostly was uneventful. This is one of those places where I think staff reset really does shine. When you have staff, they can just you just get wet and you stay wet. You're not worried about keeping your gear dry and all that. You're out in it. You put on your rain jacket, you put on your rain boots, whatever it is. But then if your socks start to get soaked or whatever, you're not really worried about it the same way as if you're trying to stay dry and avoid pasting unnecessarily. As a staff squad, you can still keep resetting your stage. We were having to deal with the bags for a few windows when the rain was falling. Thankfully, Gary McConnell had brought some waterproof targets and waterproof pasters that we could use on the movers, which worked on the movers that didn't have any kind of hardcover, which one of them did. The bobber had a significant amount of hardcover painted on it, which that's, people ask, oh, why don't you just pay for the waterproof targets and use them? And that's really the main downside is the fact that they're basically impossible to paint. I've heard different people having different solutions. The best one I've heard is you just get wide, either black painter's tape or duct tape or something. Yeah, I guess painter's tape probably wouldn't hold up in the rain. So you'd probably need something waterproof like duct tape or Gorilla Tape. And you just have to basically put strips of that anywhere that you want hardcover. And potentially you can just cut the rest of the target off past the non-scoring hardcover border if whatever the hardcover arrangement leaves you with enough to, as long as it leaves you with enough to staple the target up. But that's the main downside of the waterproof targets is you can't really paint them. And so if you're using painted hardcover, you have limits there. And again, there are all kinds of solutions around that, but we were just not really set up for that. So it's definitely something that we're looking into for next year. If for no other reason, then almost by definition, having that will mean we won't get rain for another 5 years or whatever. But that was the main issue. As far as I know, though, in terms of traction or footing, the only issue, and there was, some competitive equity issues. There was a balance beam that, it wasn't huge. I think it was 2x8 maybe. So it was a pretty wide beam. You could get your whole foot on it. You weren't really having to balance per se. But if it was easy you had to get sort of sure footing on it. And so when it got wet, it was just uncoated wood. And so there definitely was some slip sliding on that on Sunday. And that, something to look at in the future, maybe add some grip tape or something like that. But it definitely was a learning experience in that sense. But other than that, it seemed like everybody dealt with the rain relatively well and things kept moving. And even with, I think it was 3 periods of rain and periods of putting the bags on and then taking them back off, we ended up finishing right on schedule, getting to start teardown. Teardown went great. Everybody, all the staff were able to get everything pulled up to the mouth of the bay, and then we drove around with trucks and picked up all the barrels and walls and put them away, and folks were able to grab their checks and hit the road and hopefully be home before, depending on how far you had to drive, but before 7, 8, 9 p.m. So another great match. Like I said, I have some more stuff to talk about next week about the chrono stuff specifically and sort of what went well, lessons learned on that side of things. But overall, I genuinely think that this is the best match yet that we've managed to put on, from just applying all the lessons learned of the past few years. Obviously, we learned a few things that we'll be applying to next year, but yeah, this was a good match. Hopefully, if you have any questions or anything that you saw or you want to know more about, shoot me an email. I'm happy to share anything that we know or point you to someone if it's a question I can't answer. But yeah, really happy. Everything, it was a ton of work, as it always is, most of it by people, not me. Yeah, I'm not trying to say, thank me for my service here, but it was definitely something that was not easy, but it was definitely worthwhile. I think everybody involved felt a real sense of satisfaction, and the response online has been really positive so far. So hopefully that's a good sign. And hopefully next year, so this was actually the first year out of the 5 that the whole match has sold out, which I think part of that, probably the biggest thing is just ammo prices have come back. So all the factory ammo shooters can afford to just buy factory ammo and come shoot it. And so that really helped. But, I would like to think it's also the word is getting out that this is a quality match and people are coming from further away. I know we had one guy come from Texas, one guy coming from Kentucky that I'm aware of. And so, we're definitely pulling people from more than just a one state radius around. Luigi Lee flew up from Florida to shoot it. So it was, it was really, really encouraging to see the word get out and people willing to travel and come shoot our humble state match. And just thanks to everybody involved, and a job well done. And hopefully, if you're listening to this, you can join us next year if you weren't there, and hopefully we'll be able to reproduce the formula and put on another good match if everything goes well once again. Well, that wraps up this episode of Short Course. If you want to get in touch with me, my email is ben@berryshooting.com. Talk to you next time.